Well, welcome to this episode of Actually Olympia, the podcast. As always, I'm your host, Jay Burney, the city manager. And with me, as always, is my partner in the podcast, Kellie Brossett.
My constant partner in crime. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hi, Jay.
Hi, Kellie. So, Kellie, I'm just going to say this at the top, but this is our last podcast together because somebody said it was okay for you to retire at the end of this month.
Somebody signed something. I'm really grateful to it, but yeah, it is. I will miss this, and I'll miss you.
Well, I just want to take a moment to thank you for not just your service to the community, but your service and to me and the council and everyone who works here, and just our time working together. It's just been an absolute highlight of my career to work alongside you.
Well, thank you. And I want to thank you for allowing us to do almost every crazy idea we came up with.
Yeah, that's good. Well, let's kind of dig into the podcast.
Yes,
and for today's podcast, we have a great guest, and I'd like to welcome Mayor Dontae Payne to the podcast.
Very special guest.
Thank you for having me. I also want to acknowledge your upcoming retirement, Kellie. It's still surreal that this is your last podcast, and that last week we had our final council meeting with you, and so I'm still not believing it. So I think it's gonna take a while to hit me, but wishing you the best.
Thank you so much.
I'm really grateful to be here to talk about a really important topic that's not just important for the city, but is also deeply important to me, and in particular to many people who feel that marginalized people deserve equity.
Yeah.
And so this topic that we're going to be discussing today is really one of the most significant contributors to advancing equity.
Yeah, and that topic we're going to talk about today with you is our work around reparations. Mm-hmm. And we've got a study session tomorrow night, and we thought it'd be good to have you here and talk just a bit more about kind of our work and where it originated from and all of those things. And before we dig into that, we always start with our guests talking about their origin story and kind of how they got into the work that they do. And I say this every time. I like to think, Kellie and I like to think of our employees and our council members and all of our guests as superheroes that are serving the community. And all superheroes have origin stories. Mm-hmm. So talk just for those that don't know your background, a little bit about you and why you got into this job being the mayor of Olympia and why you love this work.
Sure. So long story short, my service goes back to my time in the United States Army. And that's really how I got involved into this work. I had joined the Army at 23 years old, and it gave me a whole sense of purpose, a newfound sense of purpose. That I hadn't really thought about what it meant to serve in a way that was so much bigger than just my own family and myself, and what it meant to be of service to other people. And I suppose, looking back, you have examples of other people like that in your life, teachers and things like that. But I really didn't realize the impact that you could have with that service until the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell when I was in the Army. Mm-hmm. And as an openly gay man in the military, I had deployed to Afghanistan for the final year of that policy back in 2010. And President Obama signed the repeal in 2011. And I immediately saw an impact to my life and the lives of those who I knew were also part of the LGBTQ community in the military. Mm-hmm. And I saw the immediate effects of that repeal. And I thought, wow, I need to start paying attention more, because these things really have an impact on people's lives.
Yeah.
And before I knew it, I was down a rabbit hole of just looking at all the different ways that government touches our lives and how it affects us. And I had moved to Washington. I re-enlisted once after my second tour in Afghanistan to come to Washington State, and served for 2 years on Joint Base Lewis McChord. And after I separated from the Army, it was sort of almost like a natural step for me to say, how could I be of service outside of uniform? Mm-hmm. And I really wrestled with that for some time. And I decided to go back to school, and I ended up eventually getting my master's degree at the Evergreen State College. And I thought, well, public service, that's how I can continue to serve my neighbors and my community outside the uniform. And so I made that evolution. And then what propelled me to run for council was 2020 and the murder of George Floyd, and really just thinking about my time here as a community member on the issue of homelessness. And as you can remember, in 2018, it was probably at its worst for us.
Yeah.
And I saw
Tough year.
how visible and how tough of an issue that was. And so between all of those things, between homelessness and public safety concerns after the murder of George Floyd, and needing to see our elected leaders speak to the moment was something that was important for me. And then combined with my experience with the military, those were all the reasons that I decided it was time to step up and try to run for office. And so I did.
Oh.
Well, go ahead,
I was
Kellie.
going to say, it's one of the best things that happened to us.
Yeah, I was going to say, everybody's journey to get to public service is different. I mean, everyone we've had on the couch has a different story to tell, right? But the one thing that y'all have in common is how fortunate we are that your journey's landed here,
Right.
Thanks.
right, in Olympia.
Yeah.
And it has been an absolute joy to work with you as a council member and now as mayor. And so I can look forward to our continued future together. But, so let's kind of get into the
Good
topic.
conversation.
So
Let's do it.
when we talk about reparations, Mayor, in terms of what's on our work plan, the things we're working on, what are they and what are we talking about, and what is the focus of our work right now?
Sure. So reparations is very briefly is about repair, right? It is about reparative action, hence the term reparations, and making sure that we understand that there is a need for us to repair the harms of the past. So none of us alive today are guilty of being part of the institution of enslaving other people. But that doesn't absolve us of our responsibility to work towards repairing those harms. And that's something I think is an important distinction for people to hear, is that it's not about saying the people that are alive today are responsible.
Yeah.
They're not responsible. But we collectively are responsible from what we do from this point forward. And so that's why I feel a sense of duty and responsibility to address the issue of reparations. So what is it? Reparations is, again, the repair of the harms done in the past. And in this context, we're talking about the enslavement of African people, which lasted for hundreds of years over generations. And so when we talk about that, we're thinking about lifetimes, people born into slavery and dying in slavery. And then the next generation doing the same thing over and over until it eventually ended as an institution. And so when we talk about that generational enslavement, what we're really talking about is trauma that exists in our bodies. And Black Americans' bodies. And that trauma is passed down all the way to us present day. So in 1865, Juneteenth, 1865 is when the last of the enslaved people found out that they were freed, which is about 2 years after the signing of the Emancipation Proclamation. So we're talking about 4 million people being freed and given nothing. They were promised 40 acres and a mule. And with the assassination of President Abraham Lincoln, that promise died with President Lincoln. And what happened is that the following president, Andrew Johnson, not Jackson, Andrew Johnson, came after President Lincoln and decided, no, we're going to give that promise of loss of property, we're going to give that to the enslavers, those who owned the enslaved people. And so they received compensation. So reparations is a monetary compensation, but not exclusively a monetary compensation. But it is a form of providing some restitution and repair to people who worked for free.
Mm.
And as a result, their descendants did not receive anything. So we all can understand the concept of inheritance, right? When you are of a certain background, whether you come from an affluent family or whatnot, you have grandparents perhaps that have passed money down to you through your family, and or maybe upon their death or something like that, you have access to money that they've left you. And it's very similar in this sense that, well, 4 million of our ancestors were freed in 1865 and they were given nothing. And they worked for free for hundreds of years and helped build this country. And what that means is that their descendants, those of us who are alive today, received no intergenerational wealth as a result of their labor passed down over the generations. And what we don't understand is that as a result, that harm from the institution of slavery didn't just stop there.
Correct.
It happened with Jim Crow laws and mass incarceration and the war on drugs and police brutality. And so voter suppression, all of these ways that the Black American experience has been shaped by the original institution of slavery. And so all of these effects are things when we're looking at disparities and disparate outcomes for Black Americans in a number of areas, whether it be education or healthcare or home ownership, access to capital. There's so many disparities in so many ways, and we ask, well, why is that? And I tend to think that it's either because you believe that Black Americans are inferior and inherently lazy, or you believe that it is the result of a system that has not addressed fully all of the harm that has been done. And slavery has frankly lasted longer than the United States' existence.
Right.
So when you think about how many years that is, we're really barely on the other side of actually addressing the harm that's been done. And so that's what ultimately this issue is about.
And I know we've talked about this idea that there's some perception around in general, the dominant community that things like enslavement and Jim Crow, they're episodic. They're things that happened in isolation and they had a beginning and end and they're over. Oh, and that was another thing that happened and it's over. And there's actually structure and connective tissue between all of those things. One thing is the same thing, just popping up in different forms. 10 generations of enslavement.
Correct.
That pops up again in Jim Crow. That looks a lot like that enslavement.
Right.
Yeah.
I think we have to remember that sometimes the stroke of a pen doesn't actually necessarily change the lived experience that we're all having. So when slavery ended, there was a resistance to that. It wasn't suddenly like, oh, kumbaya and everybody's treated equally because it's no longer law. It took time, and we can even look to today where we still have problems with race in this country, and there continues to be a resistance to people being treated equally and fairly, whether it be because of their race or gender or sexual orientation or some other protected class or status. And that's something that, as a result, we've learned quite a bit about human behavior. And when it comes to the law, we make those changes, but it takes a little bit of time for society to really embody what the new law is, right?
The change doesn't happen in their heart. It's like
Right.
it's like that's not. It wasn't a moral shift
Mm-hmm.
in
Correct.
how you perceive people. It was a legal
Mm-hmm.
shift.
Let's talk about the path to getting this on the council's work plan, because I think some folks are, kind of, how did we get here, and kind of how did this end up on council's work plan? And it's not just what we're doing at the state level. There's also some state asks in there as well.
Yes, correct. It actually starts with sort of with my journey, as a state employee, working in the Governor Inslee's administration. And at the time, there were some conversations around reparations and the idea of the state taking on the issue to create a task force or a commission. And it was a dialogue that was very slow moving and I wouldn't say had resistance, although I'm sure there certainly was some resistance. I never heard it outright.
Mm-hmm.
It was more so like a lack of political will,
Yeah.
is what I would describe it as. And so it was tough to try to accomplish something at that particular time there. And I was elected as mayor, and I said to myself, well, I have another role. And what could I do in that role? And so the idea of introducing a referral, and our referral is a process by which a city council member will provide a document that essentially answers a few questions about a particular policy issue that they want to address, that they either want to direct staff or a committee to do some work on. So it could be brought forward for council's consideration as a formal action. And part of this referral process involves a prime sponsor, if you will, and then it also has 2 additional names for you to choose amongst your fellow colleagues on council to join you. And so you have 2 co-sponsors in addition to the prime sponsor to introduce it and bring it forward. And so I had drafted a referral and selected Mayor Pro Tem Eyoung Win and Councilmember Robert Vanderpool to be my co-sponsors on the referral. And so we introduced the referral to propose passing a resolution to create a commission to study reparations for the descendants of enslaved people. Now, that language is very important, descendants of enslaved people. And what we understood by that language is that this is not a race-based conversation. This is a descendants of enslaved people conversation. So in theory, you could be a white presenting person and still be entitled to compensation as a descendant of an enslaved person.
Like the Pope.
Right.
Yeah.
And so this isn't a race-based conversation. I think that's important for people to understand.
Yeah.
This is about, like I said, being a descendant. And so that language is very important to me, and more specifically, a descendant of African enslaved people, because that's the institution that was prominent here in the United States.
And unique.
And unique.
Unique in the world.
Correct. And so we passed this resolution, which calls on a number of things, starts out with speaking about the history of this country and the institution of slavery, but it also gets into the history of the city of Olympia with the enslavement of Charles Mitchell, who was a 13-year-old boy who escaped to his freedom up into Victoria, Canada, by a steamboat after he was enslaved for what we believe about 5 years here in Olympia between ages 8 and 13. And he was able to escape due to the assistance of some Black men in particular that were in Canada who helped him find his way. And so I bring that up because sometimes we hear, well, slavery didn't exist here in Washington, so this was not a slaveholding state, and that would be correct. It was not it wasn't institutionalized here,
Mm-hmm.
but it was allowed. It was allowed to exist, and there was no enforcement of the fact, if you will, that it wasn't legal here.
Yeah.
So it was just allowed to persist because it had gone unaddressed. And so the state actually decided to use his name as a way to educate Washingtonians about who Charles Mitchell was, and that there was, in fact, an enslaved person in our state, in our state capital of all places. So the resolution calls for us to do a number of things. It calls for us to really push for the state and the federal government to address this issue by studying it through a commission or a task force to study reparations for the descendants of enslaved people. And that is the primary action. In fact, if you look at the title of the resolution, that's the primary purpose of passing it, was really to push for the state and federal government to do more in this area. And that's because it really is more of a larger conversation in the context that it is the United States that needs to address this harm as well. But that doesn't absolve local jurisdictions from doing anything either. And the reason for that is local jurisdictions are the ones really or primarily responsible for implementing a lot of racialized policies and causing a lot of harm over the last, several, at least century and a half of local government, really backing up the federal government and its policies. And so we're complicit in that. And so that's why we also need to be part of the conversation.
And isn't it also true that all of America, including Olympia and Washington, benefited from an American economy that was built on the forced free labor of people?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so that's the primary action in the resolution, is to call on the state and the federal government to study the issue. And then you have, the state action. So this past session, our resolution, we pushed for the state to invest in and study the issue of reparations. And so we succeeded, long story short, as the legislature decided not to introduce a bill on the issue, but rather to do a budget proviso. And given where we were with the budget and our deficit as a state, the original proposal from $1.2 million was deducted from that to about $300,000, $150,000 for year 2026 and 2027. That gives the authority of the Department of Commerce and the Commission on African American Affairs to essentially find a consultant that could do this work to do this study. And so we succeeded in that regard in getting the state to actually take action and put it in the operating budget. And we were successful in doing that. So that's our first success that we've had. And our resolution calls for a number of other city actions also, things like developing our own home ownership goals, joining the Black Home Initiative, which we've done. At your direction as city manager, may I add. I think you knew exactly where we were in terms of our priorities and our values, and you were able to speak to that and represent us, as a city that's something that we should do. And so we joined King and Pierce counties in that effort to provide more access to home ownership opportunities for our Black residents. And so it also calls for things like reviewing all of our various plans at the city and looking for opportunities where we could do that repair work in other ways.
Mm-hmm.
So I mentioned earlier that direct cash payments is one way, but there are several other ways.
It's not the only way.
It's not the only way.
Right.
And so, given where we are with our current budget situation, we are not in the position at all in the short term or any time in the near future to provide direct cash payments to residents of our community. But that doesn't mean that there aren't other actions that we could be taking in the meantime. And so our study session tomorrow will really be a conversation about what are those other actions?
Yeah.
What are some other ways that we can go about addressing these systemic issues that are a problem, and specifically for our city?
Mm-hmm.
Because we have an understanding that, Olympia has a 3% Black population. And yet there's so many disparities in so many areas for Black Olympians in particular.
Well, and that Black homeowners initiative, one of the things, there was a website where you could see where there were covenants
Mm-hmm.
in Olympia, and I mean personally, I looked, and apparently where I live has the racial covenant. My surprise.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yep.
so that was alive and well here in Olympia, and I think it shaped that percentage of African Americans in the community as well.
Right. That's actually something that I'm glad you brought that up, because I don't think people understand why Lacey has more Black people, for example, than city of Olympia. And Lacey is actually a fairly newer city compared to Olympia.
Yep.
I believe it was incorporated in 1966, if I remember correctly. And so we have the Fair Housing Act, I believe, was passed just 2 years later in 1968. And by that time, the city of Olympia had already had a number of racially restricted covenants.
Yep.
And redlining had already been, well into its implementation, by the time the city of Olympia, the city of Lacey was incorporated. And so Olympia has this history of racially discriminating against people for housing in particular, and not even just for Black people, but for anyone who was non-white.
And it's not just like in the covenants and in the laws, it's also in practice. My own personal story, I was looking for a house in Olympia, and my husband and I got a realtor, and we very specifically, I want a house on the west side of Olympia. And every time we went out to look for houses with this realtor, he drove us to Lacey. Every time. And on like the third trip, I just said, I'm not getting out of the car, because
Yeah.
I've already told you this is not
That's not where I want to live.
But that practice within the industry, even
Yeah.
subtly, that's an example of it.
Yeah. And yes, and it's also an example of our current demographic makeup, if you will,
Right.
is that we see that there are more Black people in the city of Lacey than Olympia, specifically because of that history. And we can see how that history of exclusion the effects of that can be felt today. And so that's something that is an example of how what was done in the past still affects us.
Yeah. Well, I want to go back to a couple of things you said, Mayor. One is just when we talk about process and how things make the work plan and your referral. But when things are on the work plan, they have the unanimous support of the council. And we have lots of council members that are champions of certain things on the work plan. And you are certainly a champion for this work. But it is fully supported by the entire city council. And I think that's important. When people always ask, like, how do things get on the work plan? They get on the work plan because the council as a whole says this is important to all of us, and we all want to have this conversation with our community. So
that's right. Yeah, and I really appreciate that my council colleagues see the importance of it and understand that we do have a stake in it. I think it's easy for people to feel that, well, I can understand it in theory or in a concept, but I'm not so sure that local government has a responsibility
Right.
or a role in that, or I'm not so sure that city of Olympia needs to be doing anything specifically to address it. And it wasn't difficult for me to make that connection for my council colleagues to understand. They were very much supportive, and almost immediately. There was never a hesitance or anything on their part, but I would say they had more so questions about, well, what is it that we can do
Right.
to be supportive? And I really appreciate that about each of them.
Yeah, me too. Well, Mayor, you also mentioned that, this has been a priority in your time as mayor, and why now and why in Olympia?
Well, really, it's something that I understand as probably, like I said earlier, one of the most significant contributors to addressing disparity and inequity in society, specifically for those who are descendants of enslaved African people. This is an issue that I feel could certainly help address so many of those disparate outcomes in so many areas. So that's why it is such an important thing for me, because I think we talk about equity work, and that's a broad umbrella, and there's a lot of ways that we can do equity work in any individual area. Just take education, and there's a ton of equity work that can be done in that space. The same with healthcare and so on, housing. And for me, reparations is also an umbrella equity issue, in the sense that when we're talking about wealth and intergenerational wealth, we're talking about passing that on to your descendants, and what they could do with that has impacts in a number of ways, whether it be through housing or education or healthcare or any area in your life. And so when we're talking about it in a more micro level, so to speak, and we are talking about reparations in any of those areas within housing, what can we do to address racially restricted covenants? For example, the county has a program where they are taking that issue on. So that's what it looks like to address it on an issue by issue basis.
Yeah.
And so there's the broader direct cash payments, and then there is the more micro or more specific, which is addressing it within each issue. And I think both have to happen simultaneously. So that's why it's an important issue to me. And I think we can do all the equity work we want, but I think we will still see so many disparities if we don't address economic inequality, and that there is a reason for that economic inequality that we really need to address. The other thing is, I'm also the city's first Black mayor, and I was elected after 164 years of no one who looks like me serving in this role since 1859. And so I do feel a tremendous sense of responsibility with the time that I've been given in this role to be the one to say, this is an issue that the city should address.
Yep.
And I understand that I will just be honest and say that comes at a huge expense to me politically. Any capital or anything like that I have is being spent on this issue because I believe in it so strongly that it may not be politically advantageous, but it is something that is important for us to address.
I have a question for you. Just popped in my head, and that is maybe can you imagine for me, what does America for everyone look like after repair?
Well, that's a great question, Kelly. It looks like, For me, I see reparations as an economic stimulant.
Mm-hmm.
So if Black people were and descendants of enslaved people were given the wealth that they should have inherited from their descendants who worked for free, then it would look like a stimulant to our current day economy. So we wouldn't necessarily see that wealth just only be the descendants of enslaved people, and that's where it would all stay. It would be invested in so many ways where people would benefit, whether it be in business or in housing or, starting nonprofit organizations, all of these ways that people who are the beneficiaries and recipients of this repair would put back out into the world. And as a result, everyone else would benefit also. And that's what we've seen over and over with things like, the Civil Rights Act, for example. When that was passed, it wasn't just Black Americans that benefited from the passage of the Civil Rights Act, although we were out in front and leading the way for that to succeed. Ultimately, everyone else benefited as well. And it would be the same thing with this issue. And so, yeah, it's hard to imagine what America would look like, but that's how I envision it, is that we all would benefit as a result of addressing the harm.
Yep.
And one of the original sins of this country, the other being the attempted genocide and erasure of our indigenous community members, our Native American populations. Those are the two things that at the start of this country is really been atrocities that have gone unaddressed over the last several centuries. And so it's hard to think of what a country would be like have we actually addressed those things.
Like millions of Americans contributing to the economy in a deeper, bigger way than they are right now. Right?
Exactly. And so that's why I say it's an economic stimulus that not just the recipients would benefit from, but everyone else as a result.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned, and we talked a fair amount about all the different forms and ways that reparations can happen beyond just cash payments. And we're doing our own study work, which is what we're going to talk about in our study session tomorrow. And I know you've had a sneak peek at all this and of what the rest of the council is going to hear and the community is going to hear tomorrow. But can you talk a little bit about what you're already finding or seeing that other cities or other governments might be doing in this space, and what we've kind of learned so far in our study?
Sure. So the first municipality in the United States to address this issue and implement a reparations program was Evanston, the city of Evanston, Illinois. And that program, I believe, started with about a $20 million fund, if I remember correctly. And that fund was used for people to apply and do things like make home repairs and things like that with the money that was provided from the city through that program. And they have their own history with the enslavement of African people and things like that. And so that it was an issue that was brought up for them. Interesting point also, like Olympia, is a majority white community, although they have a much larger Black population in Evanston. And so what Evanston did was really start this national dialogue about municipalities also getting in the game on what to do to address the issue of reparations. And Evanston is currently the subject of their program is tied up in the courts. And so it is yet to be seen if their program will be allowed to continue. It's being challenged on the basis that it is what some would say is a race-based program, and that should be considered illegal, and that it goes against our 14th Amendment and the Constitution. And so we have yet to see where the courts will decide on that issue. And in fact, other local governments are sort of watching to see what is decided, because that will set the precedent. Another reason that you don't necessarily see local governments implementing the same types of programs, because those who are interested are sort of waiting to see what's decided. But Evanston went first, and so shout out to them for being the ones to lead the way. But we also have other cities that have done other things, like start their own commissions or task force. We have cities that have started similar funds, but maybe with less dollars, and usually tied to a very specific purpose, so that it's more of a home repair fund. I mentioned that earlier, as opposed to a reparations fund.
Yeah.
Other communities have done things like seeing if there is a private fund that could be set up, or loans. And I will just be honest and say that there are things that other cities have done that I don't necessarily feel are reparations. So when we talk about equity work, again, it's an umbrella. And so not every and all things are reparations. A private fund is, it doesn't really get at the repair, which is that the government is responsible for addressing the harm that has been done. Individual people who care about this issue and have a passion, that's great, but it's not a charity.
Yeah.
It's about the government owning up to what it has done.
Harm.
And
a harm.
yes.
Well, there was a promise made and a promise that wasn't kept.
Right.
Exactly. And there has to be accountability, right? And so that's why I don't think a private fund is really going to address the issue of reparations. I don't consider it reparations. I consider it a form of charity. And the same with loans. Well, if you have to pay it back,
Right.
it's not reparations.
Yeah.
And so, but there are cities that have introduced things like that and are calling it or referring to it as a form of reparations. But I suppose maybe there's more for me to learn in that space, but I don't necessarily consider it to be so.
Well, and part of why we're doing the study is for us to do our own learning.
Right.
Right. And, part of getting a start is figuring out what have others done, what might work here that work there, what might be a good idea here, but not a good idea somewhere else. Right. And so we have to root ourselves in what's possible and then start to wade through what's works here and and what's right for us, because no solution is in one place works everywhere. Yeah. So, as I look at, my list of questions I have for you, we've done a really good job of covering most of them. But one that I think we should spend just another moment on is the importance of intergenerational wealth. And you've mentioned that, and maybe just talk for a minute about why is that important to this conversation?
Yeah, thanks, Jay. It's important to the conversation because I think it's important for people to understand how those of us who are alive today benefit from intergenerational wealth. And so we all like to think of ourselves, I think, as pioneers in our own right, and that we work for everything that we have, and there's a meritocracy aspect to our lives and things like that. But there are many of us that have been given a boost, and there are many of us that started on third base and were able to get back, to the home plate. And so what it means is we have to be understand that those of us who have benefited from intergenerational wealth, some of those people are actually people who are descendants of enslavers.
Mm-hmm.
So people who were enslaving other people. And because they owned the most valuable asset at the time, which was African people
Free labor.
and free labor,
Mm-hmm.
that it's hard to imagine that someone today, as a result of their ancestors owning enslaved people, have been given a boost or are born on third base
Yeah.
because their family has benefited from enslaving other people.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll give you an example of just some private entities today that operate because of their business in the institution of slavery. So you have Aetna Insurance is an example of a private entity that has benefited from insuring enslaved people for loss of property. So, for example, if you were to have like a runaway or something of that nature, the enslaver could claim losses if they insured their loss of property, and Aetna is one of them, as well as Wells Fargo. And there are several other entities that exist today that had business dealings in upholding the institution of slavery. And the government can't control what those private entities do in that space. But you are seeing organizations like Aetna and Wells Fargo who are actually acknowledging that harm and are having those conversations for themselves in their own organizations about how they might address it.
Yeah.
And so when we talk about intergenerational wealth, it's important for people to understand that so many of the disparate outcomes that we have, particularly with the Black community, whether it be, because there's a disproportionate crime rate in Black communities, for example, so much of that has to do with the economic conditions of our communities, right? And had we been given the opportunity to actually inherit something that could have been a very different situation for Black Americans. And that distinguishes us from other immigrants to this country. Correct. When we think about like, oh, well, how come this group can come here and do so well and they don't complain about anything? They immigrated here, they own their business, they're sending their kids to college, they're doing everything that they can to assimilate into American society, and they seem to be having no problem. They don't seem to be using race as an excuse for not advancing. Why can't Black people do the same?
Mm-hmm.
And it's because we have a different legacy and a different story that is very unique to an institution that has quite literally traumatized our ancestors. And as a result, that trauma exists in our DNA and in our bodies as Black people. And that has resulted in different lived experiences for us individually and collectively. But then you also have the compounding aspect of the government-sanctioned policies perpetuating harm over generations. And there is no way of having the wealth, for example, to make bail or, any of these ways. And so we look at our incarceration rate for Black men in particular, and we wonder why.
Yeah.
Right. So it all goes back to that. And so the importance of intergenerational wealth is really about being able to leave something for our descendants, those of us who are alive today. How do we not continue to perpetuate this injustice that slavery has left us? How do we correct that so that future generations of descendants of enslaved people have something that they can invest in for themselves and, more importantly, contribute to society as a result of their own success.
Right. And there's something about the systemic and structural way that the country has been set up. I mean, in intergenerational wealth results in self-determination, right?
Mhm.
The ability to determine your own life, to make your own choices, to move up the ladder. And people who are self-determined aren't available to be cheap labor.
Right. Well, one of the reasons
So,
that I circle back to this
Yeah.
this conversation, Mayor, and I really appreciate expanding on it, is
Yeah.
you asked the question earlier, Kelly. What does this look like in the future from this point forward, right? And we can also ask the same question. What would now look like if everyone had the same access and opportunities, throughout the course of history? And we know that not to be true.
Yeah.
So we can't change what happened in the past, but we can affect what happens from this point forward, right?
Right. And other countries are having these same conversations. For countries that participated in the slave trade and also had enslaved people from the continent of Africa, but perhaps were in South America. Some of those places are having conversations about reparations as well. There's also a precedent for our own country in this space where we have provided reparations, for example, to those who were interned during, when Japanese people were interned in the camps, and as a result, they received a reparations for being interned in those camps because there was an impact to them and their families.
Right.
Some would say that indigenous communities or Native Americans have received some compensation in some form or another from our government. And so there is a precedent there for us to address it. But for some reason, when it comes to Black Americans in this country, it's not a conversation we want to have. And part, I think that's because people feel like they're being told they're guilty of something. And it's not so much that they're guilty of something. It's again, forward looking. What are we doing now with the time that we have? It's not about owning what someone else did 200 years ago, but what are you doing to move us forward?
Yeah. America is all wrapped around the axle around race. So much so that it's hard to even look in the mirror around it. And I really think, personally, I think that white America has its own journey around race that it needs to take without us, without people of color as assistants or gurus or involved at all. I mean, just like talk amongst yourself and figure it out. But I think that's something that also has to happen for the country to be ultimately healthy in the future.
Yes. So I think that that's true. But I am also willing to have a conversation with anyone about what this is.
Sure.
About what this is.
About this
not necessarily everyone is willing to have that conversation.
Yeah.
But there are some of us that are. And I am more than happy to speak with somebody who maybe isn't quite sure about this issue or doesn't quite know what question to ask, or maybe they're afraid of not saying something the best way.
Yeah. Grace.
Yeah. Giving that grace to people to really find out about what this is about, what's my why, what's the council's why, what is it that we're trying to address, and why do we feel a need to focus on things that some people think are divisive just because it touches upon the subject of race and background. And that in and of itself is not inherently divisive, but we treat it as such because we want to continue to perpetuate the idea that we live in a meritocracy. And so we don't necessarily want to focus on issues that touch upon race because we are taught in this country that if you just work hard enough, you can accomplish whatever you set your mind out to accomplish. And that brings me to my point about successful Black Americans, that despite all of this, we have succeeded. And in many, many ways, those of us who are, teachers and doctors and lawyers and people who have gone to space, and done all of these incredible things, celebrities, the NFL, basketball, the NBA, so many ways that we have contributed to mainstream culture, hip hop music, the blues, all of these ways that we have a rich culture that we have brought despite all of this. And then we're told that that is actually the reason that we should not address this issue, because see, you are successful anyway, or some of you are at least, and that is proof that we live in a meritocracy, and as long as you work really hard, you can achieve whatever you want. Two things can be true at once. And that is not an either or. It's true that we have many, many successes, and yet it's also true that there is economic disparity unlike no other when it comes to Black Americans.
Well, as we wrap up, Mayor, again, I think we've covered a lot of what we want to talk about today, but what else would you like the community to know about, our work around reparations?
Well, I would like the community to know that, first of all, that while this issue is important to me, I'm not only representing those who share my demographic. So those who are Black or those who are openly gay or who share any part of my identity, my job is to represent everybody. And I will continue to do that. And I say that because we tend to think that just because a leader is, pushing something for a particular group of people, that maybe they only care about that constituency. They only are there to represent that group. And for me, I do the work of the city every day for everyone. And just because I'm focusing on this one particular issue doesn't mean that that's my only issue that is occupying my time. So that's the first thing I want our community to know. What I also want you to know is I want to reiterate that I do understand the budget situation that our city is in at the moment, and that the idea of reparations as a form of direct cash payments is not something that is feasible for us at this particular time of where we are. But I hope that people are open to the idea that in this moment, with the time that I'm given as mayor, I'm planting the seeds of this conversation, and that future elected officials and future community members will start to see this as something that is a conversation worth having as we continue electing our leaders, and that it eventually, maybe we do get to a place where we're able to provide those direct cash payments to members of our community at some other time in the future of our city. But that time isn't now. And so in the meantime, what we're doing is focusing on other actions that we can do that are more feasible for us, in anticipation that someday we might be in a better budget situation where we can do that. And that is, something that for everyone, I think, to understand is that we've already been at this for so long. This issue of reparations has gone on and on for a long time. And so we're not under any illusion that this is going to happen tomorrow or next year, but that more, just a little bit more and more at a time.
It has to start somewhere.
We're moving that needle to more progress. And I think that is something that is what this council ultimately wants to do. And I hope everyone is open to having, your own conversations with your around your tables at home about what you think about this idea, and whether it's something that you see a different way or some other thing, because the best ideas don't always come from inside of the government either.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes those good ideas come from ordinary or regular community members, right? Which someday I will go back to being, right?
Right.
And so what is it? Maybe there's a thought or an idea that could change everything that comes from the outside in. So I hope folks will dig in and learn more.
Yeah, and so we have a study session tomorrow night. We're going to be presenting the results of our study and our findings, and start to talk about next steps. And by the time this podcast airs, that study session will have passed. So I'm going to encourage folks to, as soon as you click out of this, go out to the city's website and go to the council agendas page. We record all of our study sessions, and so you'll be able to go back and watch it if you didn't get a chance to. And what I'm going to ask people to do is tune in with curiosity. I think we all, if we tune in with curiosity as a mindset, have a little more openness to listening better than tuning in to be critical. So.
Right. And you're also working on a blog post.
I was just going to mention that.
Yes.
Yes. And so I'm also working on a blog post that will eventually be posted for people who may not be audio or visual learners, but maybe they, or, in terms of watching the podcast, but maybe they want to read my words, and that will be an option for them as well. And also you can, there are some aspects in writing that I emphasize a little bit more on that we didn't necessarily have time to get to today.
Yeah.
So I encourage people to check out the blog as well.
Yeah. So a lot of great opportunities to continue to learn and engage on this topic, both through the blog and through the study session. And then, the study session will lead to other work items, I'm sure, that will be in future work plans, because it's not going to be a one and done. It's going to lead to some other things, as you said, to give us some thoughts and ideas about where we go from here.
Yes.
Yeah. So, well, Mayor, I want to thank you for being here and joining Kellie and I on this podcast. This has been just a super meaningful conversation for me, and I think for all of us. And Kellie, I want to just thank you for going on this podcast journey with me. I know what this is going to look like after this, but it's been great to have you with me on this journey. And again, I won't forget it.
Thank you. It's been fun just sitting and chatting, it's been good. Other than the fact that there's not tea here.
Correct.
I'm gonna as a regular citizen, I'm gonna make that complaint about the podcast.
There's no tea on the podcast.
There should be more tea.
Okay. Yeah. And when you say tea, like the beverage.
The beverage tea. But you could also have a little more tea.
Oh,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah, I probably could do that too. That might make it really interesting. Yeah. Well, Kellie, one last time, wrap us up and get us out.
Okay. Well, thank you for listening, Olympia, and especially personally, thank you for listening to this topic.
Yeah.
And opening your mind and opening your heart a little bit on this particular one. And you can find this podcast everywhere you can find a podcast. And when you do, give us some love, subscribe, like, tell us how wonderful it is. There's also going to be a video version of this because there are cameras in this room with us.
Everywhere.
Everywhere. Cameras everywhere. So there's a video version on olytv3.com, and which will also be on YouTube as well. So check out our YouTube channel, and also download our app, Oly TV app. It's really good. You can watch it on your phone. You can watch this. Also, you can watch the mayor at council meetings as well on your phone, and everything else. It's on demand. So, and then What to expect next time. They're going to take a little break. Jay's going to go on a little sabbatical.
I'm going to be on sabbatical.
And
so
yeah, and we will reconstitute actually Olympia later in the summer.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So there you go. Also, we're always open to questions, especially if this topic generated some questions, send them in. And no question is too big or too small. So send them to oli.tv@ci.olympia.wa.us. That should appear on some little thing below me on the
bottom,
screen,
on
on the
crawl.
bottom of the screen. So you don't have to actually remember all those
It's
letters.
magic.
That's it. It's magic. It's magic. And so is this podcast
Yeah.
and this journey with you, Jay.
well, thanks, Kellie.
All right. Thank you.
All right. See y'all next time.
All right.
Thank you both.
Thank you,
Bye.
Mayor.